Welcome back to another riveting round of information about composition basics. Last time we talked about isolating the focal point, and this time we're going to talk about the rule of thirds. And you might be sitting there and thinking, but Miss Tran, we've already talked about the rule of thirds, and you are absolutely right. Which is why I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I am going to give you some more visuals, make you think about it some more. This alone should emphasize to you how important the rule of thirds is. And look at that. The first line in my presentation on the subject is that it's the single most important rule of photography to learn and apply. If you remember nothing else from all of these videos, I hope that you remember what the rule of thirds is and how to use it. The rule of thirds helps to restore balance to a photograph. Oftentimes, if we put things in the center, it feels really heavy and static, but when we put things outside of it, on these intersection points, or along the intersecting lines, we get more dynamic compositions. There's more room for movement and more room for interpretation. So in your mind, when you're taking a picture, I want you to divide it into 9 boxes. 3 wide, 3 high. And when you're lining up your shot, try to get your focal point on one of these sweet spots. So I have a diagram on the right-hand side here that shows a kind of example of how you might break down your picture. Get your focal point on these intersection spots, these sweet spots, or along the lines. Do not put your subject in the center. More on that in a minute. So notice here that one of the main focal points lands right at that intersection spot. We have 4 subjects in this picture, 2 clawing hands and 2 wings, and the wings line up around the outside, and one of the hands lands at a sweet spot, and the other hand, still lying along one of those lines, gives us a really good sense of movement around the outside of the picture. There's not really one place where we're blah, 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 that we are beholden to. There's not one specific spot to look at, even though there's only one small composition and one small area. Next up, what's the focal point in this one? Does it fall along those third lines? Look at that. Our people here fall almost perfectly along these lines. And our single most interesting thing isn't in the very center of the picture. This still gives us a lot of space to move around and look and not stare at one single spot for a long time. You want to do that to your audience. Don't make them look at one thing all the time. Next up, bonus round, you can play the guessing game of how old is Miss Tran in this picture, for a little laugh and giggle. Where's the focal point, or where are the focal points in this picture? If you said the eyes, or the face in general, I would say you're right. Now, you might be noticing that the eyes don't exactly fall at those intersection points, but the corner of the smile does, and the eye falls along that edge, the smile runs along that other intersecting line at the bottom, and then in the background, we have this waterfall that kind of balances it, kind of follows a similar curve. And the single most interesting thing isn't in that center panel. And lastly, on the same trip, we have another little pair of waterfalls. What are you most drawn to look at in this one? Is it the little splashy bits at the bottom? Is it the trees along the outside edge? Is it the waterfalls themselves? Any of the above answers are fine, and look at where they fall. The waterfalls follow those vertical lines. The little pool at the bottom follows that bottom line. The intersection points each have something interesting. I'd say this picture was fairly well composed. Rule of thirds part 2. To emphasize even further, it is the golden rule of photography. Go out and look at your favorite Instagrammer. Go look through a magazine, open a photography book, watch a movie. Basically, anywhere that you see professional photographers showing their work, this rule will be used at least 75% of the time. Remember, the focal point in the middle is boring. Don't put your focal point in the middle. Don't do that to your audience. Unless there's a very specific reason why you're breaking this rule, in which we'll go over later. Do not put your focal point in the middle. It's boring. It's stagnant, right? It just sits there. It's heavy. Give us something to look at and put your focal point at those sweet spots around the center. And get ready for the next set of information, which will be about filling the frame.